Stephen Quayle is an author. He's been a guest of Coast to Coast with Art Bell. He's been with me. He's an author of a book called Breathe No Evil. It's a book for understanding bioterrorism. Now, additionally, he has authored Blueprint for Survival, Investment Perspectives on Precious Metals, and Aliens and Fallen Angels. Stephen Quayle has completed his latest book, Genesis 6 Giants, Master Builders of Prehistoric and Ancient Civilizations. He's a former editor, publisher of Survival Quest and Security and Survival Chronicles, monthly newsletters that dealt with perilous events and how to prepare for them. He continues to shout from the rooftops his concern for massive loss of life due to lack of civil defense and preparation in the public and private sectors. We always turn to him here on Coast to Coast with these kinds of issues. But this time, a different twist. For more than 30 years, he has been researching and investigating the influence and relevance of supernatural hybrids known as giants. And I've got to tell you, Stephen, fascinating perspective. How did you get involved in this one?
Well, interestingly enough, George, it was through, I guess you'd say, a dissatisfaction in college with classic anthropology. There were too many question marks, and so I started to investigate just the North American accounts of the giant skeletons that were found in the Ohio and Pennsylvania Valley. And I'm talking everything from 10 to 12-foot tall guys found in copper armor. And the more I investigated, I found out it was a worldwide situation where we're talking some really big skeletons, all the way up to 36 feet tall.
If we only had basketball then, huh?
Well, I can tell you this, when some of these guys, some of the British giants, for instance, one guy specifically, listen to this, a guy by the name of William Joyce in the late 1800s, he could lift a ton dead weight, in other words, 2,000 pounds. And you're only talking about a guy that was 8 feet tall. So I think the situation that most people find in history is there are too many question marks. And when you're looking at the temples of the world, and you're looking at all of the, what would you say, the answers that are out there but seemingly are, swept under the rug, I think it becomes apparent that for some reason someone doesn't want the issue of giants brought up. And that's why I spent 3 decades dealing with it. And as you know, the book has got on the front cover a British explorer with 2 12-foot giants from Kashmir standing over him. Now, again, this was in the late 1890s, and as early as 1970, in the jungles of the Amazon, there have been actual reports of people running into very shy natives who are in excess of 9 feet tall.
How tall do you think the little guy is in the middle on your cover of your book, Genesis 6?
According to they claim he's right at 6 feet. When I got that from a group of people in London that have the only photos of these guys around. Also in the book, I have a picture of a 12'2" Irish mummy, and it's fascinating because later in the show we can get into the mummy issue. But the point that's fascinating is if you take guys that are all the way up to 36 feet tall, 20 feet tall. The Emperor of China had 2 15-foot guards. Charlemagne himself was surrounded by rather large individuals. We have a Roman emperor named Maximinius who was a giant himself. His wife's bracelet, George, would fit around his thumb. We're talking about people that are, we're talking about people with big egos, big appetites, and incredible strength. We're not talking about the medical situation that you see sometimes on the History Channel where they show giants as being these guys that don't live very long, obviously like Andre the Giant, who was a wrestler.
Right.
We're talking about guys with unbelievable strength, unbelievable knowledge, and unbelievable wisdom. On the website, I even show some of the Incan kings, I-N-C-A-N, Inca, from the Inca Empire, basically in the museums of Peru, that have 4 to 5 times the cranial mass of a standard human skull. So we're not only talking about big guys, we're talking about people with incredible intelligence, and we're talking about an answer that obviously classical anthropology and archaeology, these guys don't want to deal with this. I think it was David Hatcher Childress that coined the word Smithsonian Gate. In other words, a cover-up of history that's rather pronounced. And when you begin to dig, as I began digging over 30 years ago, you can find out that the reports of newspapers in America, of newspapers around the world. Interestingly enough, after I did the last show with Art, somebody went on the website and they sent me from Eastern Europe, they've already sponsored I guess you'd say an undertaking to go into some of the caves where they found a whole, basically, cavern of giant skeletons. And in the New Ancient American, which is a magazine that's put out in America, they found the most contemporary find. It's someplace in desert Southwest, and it actually shows the pictures of the giants, shows the cave, etc. So basically, interestingly enough, too, is that when you look at this, you see that there is a very, very, how should I say, skittish archaeological base out there that doesn't even want to deal with this.
Well, do you think, Stephen, that these giants were regular offsprings of people, or that they popped up in a very unusual way, depending on the percent of population at the time?
Well, first of all, I believe that the reason I use Genesis 6, let me read this and I'll comment.
All right.
Genesis 6, 1, 2, and 6 are kind of interesting because it gets into the whole alien, the whole Nephilim, the whole Zechariah, Sitchin, Anunnaki. But let me read it. It says this: "And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children unto them, the same became the mighty men which are of old, men of renown." Now, there are two opposing viewpoints on this. During about the 4th century A.D., the Catholic Church basically said, well, no, these were the sons of Seth, and the sons of Seth married the daughters of Cain, and out of good men marrying bad women came giants. We're talking about men, George, that had 6 fingers, 6 toes, and double sets of teeth. Now, that's kind of interesting because all through the digs in North America, especially in Catalina in California, Lompoc, where there's a prison in California, they've found red-haired giants 10 to 12 feet tall, double sets of teeth, 6 fingers, 6 toes. You go to South America, and the Mayan god Shambhalum had 6 fingers, 6 toes. And so I believe there is a supernatural element, and then you've got writers who claim that we were created by the aliens, the Anunnaki, and I obviously I don't believe that. I believe that all the myths of history center around this one thing, that basically supernatural beings had sex with earth women and produced giants. And it's in the Bible, it's in Genesis 6, Jude 6, 2 Peter, but more than that, and in addition to that, it's all through history.
So you believe that these giants are the offspring of
fallen angels.
Fallen angels from way gone back.
Well, from way gone back. And it gets into the interesting thing. You know, if we go into, let's say, Greek mythology, we've got satyrs, and satyrs was a goat-like body, a human torso, and ram's horns.
Yes.
We've got centaurs, head and torso of a man, lower half of a horse. Cyclops, giants with one eye in the center of the forehead. And by the way, 2 months ago in Indonesia, there were actual cyclopean skulls found, one eye, giant, and immediately the standard, if you will, anthropological community came out and said, oh, these are just basically calcified remains of a normal skull. We've got tritons, mermaids, minotaurs, chimeras or chimeras, and it's interesting because there's actually a patent now with the U.S. Patent Office that combines human DNA and animal DNA. So when we've got a supernatural element inserted into the equation of, in essence, fallen angels even having sex with animals, and by the way, this is ancient Sumerian text, it's ancient Babylonian text. This is something that is through history. It begins to explain a lot of where the myths came from.
Let's get into Genesis if we can without the biblical and religious twist to it.
Sure,
but
I'm
really
talking about it from a historic aspect.
Exactly. And let you interpret some of this for us, because it is there for people to read, and you've been able to pull that out when you have written about it in your book. But it is there, and it has gone on since the beginning of time here, hasn't it? It
has, and, you know, it's interesting because, again, you know, basically you have from just the Genesis account of these fallen angels having sex with earth women, producing, again, a race of incredible people. You know, everybody's heard of David and Goliath,
yes.
But what they don't know is that Goliath had, you know, 4 brothers, and these guys all had 6 fingers, 6 toes. There's a guy named Og, O-G, not a hard name to remember, and some scholars place him at 18 feet tall. So from the Genesis account in the Old Testament through all of the the historical accounts through the different continents, whether you're dealing with South America, whether you're dealing with North America, the Europeans, the Asians, the Australians, the Greeks, everybody has got their records, their bones. And, interestingly enough, the Aztecs, and there was a lot of chronicling of the Aztecs by different Spaniards that followed, especially their priests that followed the conquistadors. And basically, the Aztecs said their entire civilization was built by giants. Tiwanaku in Bolivia, up by Lake Titicaca. The point is that they have fantastic architecture that still no one can explain. Baalbek, the giant cities of Bashan, Bashan, which were called the cities of the giants. So I'm talking about a time period when there were some really big guys. And see, in classic anthropology, classic archaeology, this stuff is basically taboo. They won't deal with it. And it's fascinating because when you go even to 1905 in the Phoenix Gazette, there are actual full front page stories about a gentleman from the Smithsonian named Kincaid who actually found caverns with giant statuary from Egypt, etc. And when people have tried to investigate, David Hatch, Childress, and others, I mean, it's fascinating. They hit a dead wall. It's kind of like the scene, on Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Ark gets placed in a giant warehouse only to be forgotten. So I think it's time for this stuff to come out, because what I'm concerned about, and again, we can get to that, is the genetic engineering consequences of this. The British Museum a couple of years ago had an interesting article. They said, can Ramses II live again? We all remember the theme of Jurassic Park. DNA obviously brought back the dinosaurs. But now we're talking about the possibility of bringing back, long-lost men of renown, and it's fascinating. I believe the Human Genome Project has a lot more, what would they say, the sinister purposes than most people might imagine.
Well, why is it taboo for mainstream science to do a good investigation into giants, how they got here, and where they are today?
Well, I think primarily because, number one, they don't want to have to deal with the religious issue. And when I say religious issue, obviously the most detailed account of it is in Genesis chapter 6, Jude, 2 Peter. There's a lot of places that deal with it in the Old Testament. Second of all, it kind of throws a kink or a chink in their armor as far as just following a, if you will, a chemically determined plan of evolution. They can't account for it. The supernatural aspect of it, I think, really scares them big time.
Well, you may be right about that. And let me ask you this, Stephen. Are there giants on the planet today, much like what we see on the cover of your book?
Yes, and interestingly enough, really interestingly enough, I don't know if you've ever read any of Barry Chamish, C-H-A-M-I-S-H, or some people pronounce his name Seamus, from Israel, but he's got a book called Return of the Giants, and he's got, George, at least probably 24 eyewitness accounts of, and this is what's going to blow a lot of people's mind, 9.5-foot giants getting off of flying saucers running around, which some people call the Pleiadians.
Whoa.
Now, again, if you're dealing with the supernatural, and again, for people that don't believe in the supernatural, they're going to say, oh, man, this guy's whacked out. But if you look at the history of these guys from Europe, the North American giants, I mean, we've got a situation that's just amazing. Everybody from Coronado, Magellan, you name the great explorers of history, encountered these guys. The very name Patagonia, which everybody knows is a clothing line now from South America, the Patagonians mean Bigfoot. And I have on my website an interesting account from the Gentleman's Gazette, written in, I think, 1767. And that's pretty close to the time when Magellan actually encountered these people. And once Magellan encountered them, everybody went to see them, and then they started encountering them all over the world. So I think the interesting thing about this is that, if you listen to classic history, some miracle happens, so many thousand years BC in Sumeria, and all of a sudden men are given all kinds of knowledge and understanding that no one can explain. I kind of look at it like Solomon did. He said, the thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. We talked to different people who are Indian scholars from the continent of India, and, they basically have got in the Mahabharata, the epic poem, they've got Vimanas, which are the flying ships. I mean, it's fantastic. The battles, George, are so succinct and so detailed that you'd think you were basically in the 21st century, and it's World War III time.
Stephen, what do you think their personalities, the giant personalities, were like? Were they good people? Were they evil?
Yeah, very evil. It's interesting because, first of all, they're the ones that introduced cannibalism. You know, as I've studied every continent, and again, in my book, by the way, it's 480 pages, and as you know, George, it's got every account, who documented it, so I think it's above reproach when you're dealing with 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century eyewitness accounts that are validated by, second and third witnesses. But their personality was kind of interesting. When Caesar was encountering them in his campaigns in Europe and stuff, their voice was so shrill that it sounded like, as one chronicler said, it sounded like the voice of a harpy. Another thing is that their prowess, if you will, they lived to fight and die. In the book, I chronicle some pretty gruesome, we don't need to go into it, but some of the gruesome habits these guys have, and basically they were pretty horrific people. Now, those were the six-finger, six-toes guys. It seems like, too, that the larger, normal people, though, there were some pretty incredible people. Most people don't realize King Arthur is considered a giant by a lot of the writings, obviously of the Arthurian legend. Even, guys like, I said Charlemagne. Interesting. He stood 8 feet tall, and he had a whole...
How tall was Arthur?
9 feet.
King Arthur was 9 feet tall?
Yep.
No wonder it was easy for him to pull that sword out of the rock when he was a kid.
Yeah, it sort of puts a whole new twist on history. And, this is fascinating because, again, when you're talking about, I mean, what can a power lifter nowadays, a weightlifter, do? Really, can they do like 400 pounds dead, straight lift? I don't know. But when you're talking about guys that could do, a ton dead weight with one hand, it makes some megaliths and monoliths and a lot of the buildings that are around the world come into focus. If an 8-footer can do that, what can a 25-and-a-half-footer do?
We've all heard the story of Adam and Eve. I wonder, and we'll check in with guest Stephen Quayle, if Adam and Eve were actually giants. More to come. I'm George Norrie in for Art Bell. This is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast, George Norrie with guest Stephen Quayle. Stephen, I was told that the Sumerians had a counting system based on 6, and when you talk about 6 fingers and 6 toes, I go, maybe there's something to that. Did you know that?
Yes, and interestingly enough, when you see the Sumerian king that's seated on his throne in the standard stele, or basically the bas-relief, if you notice him, he's got very slender legs, and if he were to stand up, he would overtower by a factor of at least 2 to 1 the guys that are serving him. It's a standard Sumerian seal inscription. So, interestingly enough, when you look at the Sumerian pantheon, it's been stated that even, George, this will blow your mind, even in the halls of the military and the Pentagon, when they encounter unidentified flying objects of a specific kind, they refer to them as the gods of the Sumerians returning.
That does blow my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, how about this? Everybody knows Buffalo Bill Cody, interesting, colorful figure from the West. Now, here's just kind of like a really interesting little snippet, okay? The North American Indians believe that the first race of human beings were giants. And interestingly enough, in a story in the autobiography of Buffalo Bill Cody, Cody writes that while camping on the South Platte, a Pawnee Indian came into the camp with what the Army surgeon pronounced to be a giant thigh bone of a human being. Asked about where such a bone might have come from, the Indian replied that long ago a race of giants had lived in the area. The race of men had been, according to the stories handed down by the tribe, 3 times larger than normal men. And listen to this, and were able to outrun a buffalo and even carry it once they captured the creature. Now, that might sound unbelievable to some people, but then you can actually go into the Roman historians who talk about Maximinius, that's the guy I referred to earlier. Listen, he could outpull a chariot with a team of horses, and he's the guy that was so big, he could outrun a horse at full gallop.
Well, a horse goes at a 30-mile-an-hour clip.
You got it. So, you know, you take the standard stride of a normal man, and you get the feeling. By the way, this Maximinius had a phenomenal appetite. He ate 40 pounds of meat a day and drank 6 gallons of wine. and see, these are what are interesting in the book, and I want to share with people. In the book, I've documented over hundreds and hundreds of hundreds. Literally, I'm approaching 800 or 900 different incidents of the giants in history. And not only with the anecdotes, but with just who wrote it, where they wrote it. And if you want to understand that, when you look at the history, for instance, of the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayas, the Aztecs had their god Quetzalcoatl, which was a giant that came from the east. It's why the conquistadors were able to conquer Montezuma, because he was looking for the prophecies. And these guys were big, they were smart. And this is, if you go to Viracocha, you go just down the coast, basically, from Mexico into South America, and you get into the Mayans, and then you get into the Incas. It's fascinating. They all inherited giant cities that they did not build.
Steve, take us back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. Were they giants, or were they about our size?
Well, basically, interesting, there's a French book called Les Giants, and forgive my French, but they claim that Adam and Eve were much taller, around 7 to 8 feet. Now, again, we got to separate between, let's say this, normally larger people, and obviously everything from gravity to a different density of the atmosphere would have affected that. But what I'm talking about, the supernatural, the Nephilim, in other words, the fallen angel. And by the way, George, you know, we talked about it. Nowhere in the Old Testament do sons of God refer to normal people. In the book of Job, it's always the Benai Elohim, and you know, Sitchin and others have stretched that to mean the Anunnaki. It means literally the angels, and it talks about them being able to basically shapeshift. And every obelisk, let me tell you something that's kind of interesting. Every obelisk in history, they're found throughout the world, all, and when I say this, I don't mean to sound like a pun, but it points to the fact that the angels were able to take on themselves, you know, human sexual features and procreate. Some people have a really hard time with that, but every time you see an obelisk, even the one in Washington, that's what the real history of it is. It's not just, oh, gee, this is a nice monument. It's absolutely commemorating the fact that a specific group of angels, and, you know, interestingly enough, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found at Qumran, the Book of Enoch, which is what's called a pseudepigraphal work, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it backs up so much of what Genesis 6 and other passages in the Old Testament teach, and some people just absolutely cannot handle that.
Well, how many giants, percentage-wise, of the population, not total number, but percentage-wise, do you think inhabited the planet back in the biblical days?
Well, that's a good question, because, you know, you've got Joshua and Caleb, who took over leading the Hebrews out of Egypt into the Promised Land. Pretty much everybody they encountered, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, everybody, the Zanzamin, everybody that they encountered was a giant. So I would say this, that when you're talking about the area of Canaan, when you're talking about the Middle East, I would say, based on what I've been able to determine, pretty much 50 to 60% of who they encountered were giants. And they all, you know, it's interesting because in Joshua, he's talking about the spies that went into the Promised Land, and they said it's a horrible land, for the land devours its inhabitants. In other words, when the giants couldn't satisfy their appetite, and this is true throughout the world, you know, when they could not be fed enough, that's when they started eating people. And it's fascinating because the history of cannibalism, I don't want to sound gruesome, but is directly related and traceable to the giants.
Well, if 50% of the population happened to have been giant in those days, why is that percent way down now to a point of probably less than 1%?
Well, I think a couple things. Number one, it's important to understand that and every listen to this, every continent, every place, it seems like the giants ended up fighting. I mean, we're talking about battles with the Romans where 200,000 and 300,000 of these giants were killed in a single battle. Those are big battles, okay?
Huge battles.
Huge battles. And again, I think the problem with most people is that history's become dull and boring, and if you watch, you know, Jay Leno and he goes out on the man in the street, and, you know, most people can't even place the continents any longer. You know, I mean, when I'm sure you've been amazed, George, haven't you, at the people being asked just basic, simple questions, and they get this kind of, you know, starry-eyed glare into the world, and they can't answer the simplest of questions. I'm saying that to say this, that obviously I think history is rich with answers, and I think the skeptics are out there because, quite candidly, people have failed to take up their challenge to be able to answer a lot of these situations. Look, in the Temple of Saqqara in Egypt, you have absolute hieroglyphics that you cannot get away from that are unusual in the fact that, I mean, they look like Cobra helicopters. You know, David Hatcher Childress, I mean, Goodnight Graham Hancock, Robert Bivall, John Anthony West. Some of these guys are phenomenally brilliant. You know, Graham Hancock's gotten a lot of heat, but he's probably one of the smartest people in the world. And when he's gone and done his stellar projections, each and every one of the, like the Great Pyramid of Giza and everything, and they line up with stellar coordinates that are back 12,500 years old.
Assuming, though, Stephen, all this is correct,
right,
and that we did have in those days many, many giants of unbelievable height. I mean, I think at one point Edgar Cayce believed that those from Atlantis were extremely tall. I mean, ridiculously tall. But assuming all this is correct, your work is correct, what does that mean? What's the bottom line here with giants?
The bottom line is they're coming back. The bottom line is their DNA has already been cultivated. There are laboratories that this thing is, how do I say this? This thing is of, no pun intended, but of biblical proportion in the ramification, you know. We're talking about a lot of things happening. You know, as you know, before Malachi Martin died and Art did the phenomenal interview he did with Father Malachi Martin, Malachi Martin made a statement. He said, imagine the very worst thing you can think of, and then multiply it by, what do you say, 100 or 1,000 times?
Yes.
And that's how bad it's going to get. There has been a real attempt, especially by certain elements within the Catholic Church, to withhold the third secret of Fatima. We're talking about the giants coming back. We're talking about genetic engineering experiments. We're talking about things like the soul catcher chip. Have you ever heard about the soul catcher chip?
I have not heard that one. Tell me about that.
Let me tell you what the soul catcher chip is, okay? It's basically developed by British Telecom, and the chip is to be implanted behind the eye, and where it records, listen to this, George, every waking moment of a person's experience. According to the researchers developing the chip, this information will then be combined with cloning techniques to create a duplicate of the original person. Now listen to this, quoting. He said, this is the end of death. By combining this information with a record of the person's genes, we could recreate a person physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I would challenge that. An implanted chip would be like an aircraft's black box and would enhance communications beyond current concepts, he said. For example, police would be able to use it to relive an attack, rape, or murder from the victim's viewpoint to help catch the criminal. Now we've got the British announcing, what was it, I think 10 days ago, that they've now identified a gene that's common to criminals.
Yes.
It's kind of like the movie with Tom Cruise, where now they're going to have a committee for pre-crime. And so what's interesting about this is that a lot of people used to snicker at the longevity recorded in the Bible. Methuselah, 969 years old. Enoch, 365 years. So when you start to understand that the genetic altering, and one of the things I get asked all the time, and this is a great question, I think it's a fabulous question, did the ancient Egyptians have reason to believe that there would come a time when they could be reconstituted? May I read you the interesting thing from the British Museum?
Yes, you may.
Because this blew my mind, okay? And it's interesting because, again, we're talking about Ramesses II, one of the most famous pharaohs of Egypt, and it's fascinating that when we talk about this stuff, people say, well, they can't be doing that. Listen to this. This is from CNN Egypt. For decades, the mummified remains of Ramesses II have rested in the Cairo Museum and hauled out occasionally for the viewing pleasure of visiting dignitaries. Like his fellow pharaohs, Ramesses wanted nothing more than live for eternity. Now, some 3,000 years later, some observers speculate that maybe the ancient Egyptians, with their determination to preserve their bodies, were not so much prone to wishful thinking as they were thinking ahead. Reports that Scottish scientists have cloned an adult sheep named Dolly. Goes on to say, the question is whether such DNA could be cloned so the great Ramesses or perhaps Seti I or even King Tutankhamun rise again and have life after death they so desperately craved. And it goes on to basically say that, this is already being considered,
Well, Stephen, you seem to imply, and let me tell you, when I first interviewed you many months ago on terrorism, you scared the heck out of me. And the problem is I think you were right. You seem to imply that there's something going on here with DNA and giants. Who's doing this?
Well, obviously, and I believe that there is a group in the background, call them what you will, but there is a group in the background that's similar to the Third Reich that wanted to produce a Superman, or the Aryans, okay? And interestingly enough, that given the, how would I say this, and again, I believe obviously we're dealing in a world with that's not just carnal, if you will, or physical, but that has a spiritual element in it. We're dealing with now, if you will, looking at every single headline in the paper. It's like the four horsemen of the apocalypse are on a full gallop. I believe that what we're going to see is basically just as in the days of Noah. And what people don't understand is in the days of Noah, all this really wicked and strange stuff was going on. I think we're getting ready to see it again in an unfathomable application to contemporary events.
Do you believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that giants were the offspring of extraterrestrials who came to this planet way
If you mean by
back?
extraterrestrials, I believe that angels were, and I believe in literal biblical angels, that basically had their own realm of being. In Greek, there's a word called oikaterion, which means, in essence, their place, their dwelling place, or their, if you will, boundaries. I believe they left the boundaries that God had given to them, and that they basically mixed with the seed of women, producing this offspring. And I think that it's going to happen again, because what's happening is in Noah's day, the whole earth was filled with violence. And let's face it, this isn't a land of peace and love. I'm not only saying this land, but things are not getting, in my opinion, more sedate or more mellow. They're building towards a climax. So to answer your question, I believe that the what is commonly called the aliens, or as Zechariah Sitchin writes about the Anunnaki, are definitely fallen angels. So they would be extraterrestrials, but they would almost be extra-dimensionals.
Aren't fallen angels, Stephen, like the devil?
Well, the devil was actually a cherub, and there are different groups of heavenly beings. Let me give you a good example. One of the most interesting, if you will, windows into the past is the book of Enoch. Enoch was a guy that, in Genesis, very little is said about him, that he walked with God and was not, for God took him. Two guys that didn't die were Elijah and Enoch. The point being is Enoch wrote or is attributed to writing the book of Enoch, but there were also other volumes that have disappeared. There are people like myself that believe the Vatican has them and won't release them, okay? And it's interesting that you have in the book of Enoch a whole a panorama of not only the past but also the future. And the future in the book of Enoch is one that's pretty gruesome until God ultimately puts down evil. So I believe there is a battle between good and evil, and I believe that people should realize that if I want to keep you in the matrix, I'm going to provide you all the data and all the imagery that will support the matrix. Once you get outside of the data and imagery beyond the matrix, you find out, hey, somebody's been lying to me. And that's why I wrote this book. And again, it's 480 pages, George, 30 years of stuff. And people may not accept everything, but if they want to be blown away by what really went on in history, I would encourage them to do that. And by the way, on my website, there's a chart. I don't know if you've gone to it, but go to my website, stevequayle.com, and then look on the chart, and you'll see how tall 36-foot guys are in proportion to 6-foot guys.
Yeah, I saw that. Well,
and what's interesting, now obviously their arms would be bigger, their heads would be bigger and anything. That's just for relative size. And if you think about it again, you've got guys who are writing, from the Middle East. And have you noticed this week, too, that it seems like, well, actually in the last couple weeks, more flying saucers, more...
it's huge. They're all over the place for some reason.
They're all over the place. And so I maintain that obviously there's going to be, if you will, a dialectic setup where, the, quote, space brethren are here to save us from ourselves, kind of like the day the earth stood still.
Yes.
And the point being is that there's a very sinister side to this. And the very sinister side to this is the fact that humanity is expendable, and it's kind of like, do you remember seeing an old Twilight Zone where an alien comes with supposedly the book to save everybody?
It's called To Serve Man. That's the name of the Twilight Zone.
Being lunch.
My very favorite Twilight Zone episode. You brought it up.
And basically, what I'm saying is that we're seeing the same thing being enforced. By the way, again, it seems like, unfortunately, this is something that's coming back on the scene. And let me make a distinction, because I think this is important, and maybe we have to get to it in the second half of the show, but there is a distinction between a demon and a fallen angel, okay? A demon is a disembodied spirit. The giants, when they died, that which was born of heaven and earth, those spirits were what became the demons. They have appetites, and they all have one thing in common. You know what it is? They hate mankind.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, this is fascinating stuff. And someone says, well, how does this fit into 20th century technology? The technology of the ancients so surpasses what we have now. The point is that we're all technologically egotistical and think, oh, boy, we got this, we got that. We don't even hold a candle to some of the things that have gone before us, because in the book of Enoch, it talks about the supernatural intelligence of the fallen angels being given over to mankind to basically, enable us to kill all ourselves off.
More on giants. I'm George Norrie. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. Stephen, if there happened to be a battle between the giants and those of us who are of regular size, would the giants wipe us out?
No, I don't think so, and I think that day is coming, because when you look at just a lot of the situation that we hear references to with the, if you will, the abductions with aliens, and we know that some of their ships go down, and interestingly enough, George, we would win, but we will pay a price for that. And I kind of am fascinated by the, if you will, the attack in Kathmandu, where people are actually being zapped by whatever flying, vehicle is getting them. You're probably aware of that, but 3 people have been basically, killed, murdered, zapped, and that's the first time I've actually heard. Maybe you have heard differently, but that's the first time I've heard of a ship actually opening up and firing on people.
Well, I haven't heard about it. You're right. Now, on the cover of your book, Genesis 6, the 2 giants seem to be pretty friendly.
Well, these guys are Kashmiri giants, and this was taken in the late 1800s, 1895, I believe. And it's kind of fascinating because when you're dealing with the whole area around the Himalayas, obviously Kashmir is in the vicinity. The very word Nepal, it comes from to fall. The locals call the Himalayas, or Himalayas, some people pronounce it, the mountain of the gods. That's where Hitler sent specific, I guess you'd say, cadres of the SS looking for some of the giant tombs. Some of the Buddhist monasteries supposedly had some golden sarcophaguses with guys that were somewhere around 18 feet tall. You see that again in Raiders of the Lost Ark. When Steven Spielberg made that movie, he did do his homework and look into that. So it was interesting because most people don't understand this, that because of Hitler's occult involvement, the SS, which was, a secret organization with a lot of mystical dabblings, they went all over the world. They were looking for the Grail. They were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. They were looking for the Spear of Longinus, the spear that pierced Jesus' side on the cross. So fascinating stuff that they were looking for. Then if you understand the history of UFOs, when they really came to the forefront was right after World War II, or during World War II, the closing years of World War II. Then one of the most fascinating things was Admiral Byrd and Antarctica. All of the German U-boats had disappeared. We actually had a war in Antarctica. Most people didn't even know it existed. It was called Operation High Jump. You familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, fascinating. Listen, George, there is so much incredible stuff out there.
What happened there?
Well, during World War II, at the close of the war, when obviously to a lot of the Nazi high command, they saw that they were going to lose the war, they headed down. They actually took many of their U-boats down to Argentina, and then they went to Tierra del Fuego, which is on the coast of South America, and then they went into Antarctica. Supposedly, Antarctica was called, by the way, New Schwabenland, and because of the volcanic activity, there were actual, if you will, almost, and this is something that is fascinating beyond belief, but the bottom line is there were so many U-boats that disappeared that they were actually setting up, if you will, an under-ice city, if you will, last-ditch place that was so temperate that the reports that got back to the South Americans and got all over the world were that basically the Nazis had set up a base in Antarctica that was temperate. In other words, even in some areas it was tropical.
Underwater? Underwater?
Pardon?
This was underwater?
This was under the ice. Under the ice. And this, if someone wants to go on the internet and look this up, it's Operation High Jump, or you can go to Cyberspace Orbit and type it into their search engine. It's one of the most fascinating, overlooked stories of World War II. Interestingly enough, too, Byrd talked about encountering flying saucers, etc.
Well, there's no doubt about that, and I've seen accounts on that.
Right. So what I'm saying is, you're asking me a question. I believe we're coming to that time where there will be another battle. Let me give you a good example, okay? How the ancient will reflect the future. In the ancient Greek mythology, there was the offspring of the chimera were the harpies. You've probably seen some of the Hollywood movies where they have these like huge creatures with bird-like bodies and the heads of women. The Norse legend, the equivalent were the Valkyries, okay? Obviously, Wagner's Charge of the Valkyries, very famous piece of music. But in Revelation 9:8-9, it says the Great Tribulation period, and it is talking about this. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And this is talking about the battle that's yet in the future. So it's fascinating, isn't it? We look back to ancient history to look forward to the coming period of Great Tribulation. And I think Malachi Martin, and I want to bring him up again because that made such an impression on my life listening to him, putting two and two together. I think that he had access to so much stuff that everyone else is denied, okay? And given the access to what most people can only get snippets of or little pieces of, I think it absolutely took his breath away, and I think there's no way to describe it in human terms. And see, a lot of people get freaked out, and, I'm sorry for that, but there is an aspect of history that's very non-chemically deterministic, that's very, very much going to change the way the world sees itself. Let's take, for instance, crop circles, okay? Have you ever
I wonder what happened to all of Malachi Martin's files and things like that.
Well, I got news for you. I believe that he was wasted, and whoever wasted him took him. And when I say wasted, I don't believe that he just died a natural death.
No.
And again, I guess, whether people want to believe that or not, I could say this. There were points in Art's interview with him where he was very scared.
Yeah, I heard some of that in his voice.
Yeah, and I'm not making it up, am I? You heard it too.
I heard it in his voice. You could hear things like that. A concern. Maybe not just scared, but a concern.
Right. Kind of like a desire, George, to really tell what he knew, but he knew he couldn't. And, it's interesting because if people have a hard time just grasping what I would call in-your-face history, how can they grasp stuff that's beyond their ability to even bring it into the containment of their brain?
All right, now what were you saying, though, about crop circles and giants?
Well, yeah, now we get into some interesting stuff because, again, when you're dealing with crop circles, and I think, Colin says that there's probably he figures 25 to 30% are real, and then there's a whole bunch of people out there trying to fake. What's interesting about the crop circles, and I'll tell you a fascinating story, the crop circles are a language unto themselves, and they're a basic, some of them are spatial references to different coordinates in the universe, okay? Now, in the Bible, the word stars can be substituted for angels, okay, 7 stars, which are 7 angels.
All right.
And it's fascinating that the crop circles, what I began to do a couple years ago is to match up in a lot of the ancient writings, the angels have, like your signature and my signature, they have more like symbols. They're not hieroglyphics, but it's fascinating that there's basically a vocabulary and there's a whole story that's being told. Let's say, for instance, you're in you're in Paris, and and you wouldn't do this, but you write your name on a place, okay? And you said, "This is George Norrie from Kansas City, Kansas." Okay.
Me doing graffiti?
It's not only graffiti, but it's a time-sensitive graffiti. When I say that, it's almost like, have you noticed that the circles now are appearing in British Columbia and different parts of the world?
Oh, they're almost in every country on this planet except for one or two.
But have you noticed that they're coming out in the open or manifesting themselves almost in direct relationship to the increase in saucer activity?
True.
Well, what I'm trying to tell you is, and I got to tell you that this stuff gets into really heavy beyond what most people can grasp. The National Security Agency has a prime directive. That prime directive is simply anything that will upset the status quo is automatically classified, top secret, above top secret, and then in the compartmentalization of it. We've seen it recently in the announcement that if they do find a near-Earth orbiting object, the astronomers have to give so much notice, and they're not going to be able to tell the people for so many days. You remember that?
Yes.
Well, the National Security Agency basically has a prime directive, and anything that would disturb the status quo or, how should I say this, upset the apple cart, and my definition of upsetting the apple cart is anything they don't want us to know, is automatically classified and automatically compartmentalized. This crop circle phenomenon is like, if you will, a timed sequence of messages. And believe me, I'm not talking about I'm not even dealing with the fake ones, okay? But I'm talking about that if you were to project back like with a computer and you take the star positions of about 12,500 years ago and you superimpose them on some of the on the crop circles, you get star maps. And it's kind of like a definition. I believe that each one of those real crop circles is if you will, a specific location for a specific fallen angel, and I believe there's actually a language to it. And I know the Russians have, if you will, their dictionary, and it's kind of fascinating because the Russians started preparing their crop circle dictionary back when a lot of their cosmonauts were encountering unusual beings in space, and you can go see that, on cyberspace.orbit's website.
Well, if the 20% that Colin Andrews says is definitely not man-made,
right,
and he believes that they may have been made through some kind of mass human consciousness or something, but then definitely not man-made. There's got to be a message behind the symbols. There is a message behind the symbol, and the deal is that this is most people, and please again understand that when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, this is beyond ATS, okay? How do you tie that into giants? Well, for instance, if you look at the giant chalk figures that are in the plains of England, like the Salisbury Plain, or if you look at the Nazca lines, which are in Peru and stuff, the bottom line is you see imagery and you see giants that basically tie in with celestial coordinates. And this is something that, again, Graham Hancock, especially on the pyramids and some of the temples around the world, has done a magnificent job on. What it is, it's basically telling where this stuff is going to come from. And when I say this stuff, the entities that are going to return to Earth, and in getting into the, how should I say this, the guts of the crop circles, is the language would be space glyphs, okay? Not hieroglyphs, but space glyphs. Maps, star charts, positions, and names. And I think they're timed, and I don't know how and please, there's so much I don't know, but what I'm saying is it's fascinating that you cannot get away from the supernatural intelligence of these guys. Again, when you're dealing with the epic, the Indian Vedas and the epics and the different stories, you're talking about things that are absolutely beyond fathoming, yet this thing was recorded, thousands of years ago in such detail. It's basically, I think, kind of like, if you will, a time capsule. Well, let me ask you this, though, Stephen. The dinosaurs were huge. Right. The animals now are not. Right. It's entirely possible that through genetics, the giants were huge. Earthlings now are not, obviously. What happened in between? I mean, did they leave? Did they die off? I mean, what happened to them? Well, first of all, obviously the mass extinction, the ancients were very concerned about the cosmic catastrophes that had taken place. Everybody that recorded them, that's why they were so fascinated with the stars. They were worried about, this is my terminology, they were worried about covering their butt because they had experienced and had written down for them so many of what would call extinction-level events or mass extinctions.
And, you know, when you get into the Mayan calendar, what are they saying now? You know, it used to be 2012, and I think it's moved up to 2029. But the point being...
No, I don't know about that. I thought it was still 2012.
No, I think there are some people now that have just come up with a new date. But let's say 2012, 2029. Have you noticed, too, that 1 minute the United States is stating that, gee, we're not worried about asteroids and stuff, and then the next minute the British are making public statements in the European Union that they're going to get their plan to knock it out of orbit using nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
You know, see, what there is there's doublespeak. Again, in the United States, we live in a matrix, okay? Almost all the information, all the imagery, all the sounds, everything we get are sound bites. But the point is, the rest of the world is amazed that the Americans can be so, you know, and I interview different, when I say talk to them, obviously on email, I get hundreds of emails a day, and people are saying, do you see what's going on? And if you see how people outside the country view us, it makes those of us who are inside screaming at the top of the lungs, wait, there's a whole different world out there than is being portrayed on, you know, the network news. And not to pick on them, but it's the same thing with history. Getting back to your original question, and I haven't forgot it, about war, I believe that we're going to see the genetic altering of human DNA mixed with animal DNA to produce the very giants and monsters. And please, there are already patents like that. Are you aware of that?
War machines you're talking about, life forms that fight.
You got it. Like, and it's fascinating because Bill Joy, one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, although, you know, he wrote a fabulous essay, which is considered one of the best essays of all time, called Why the Future Doesn't Need Us Anymore. And he said with genetic engineering, cloning, and nanotechnology, we're basically facing extinction. That was the, you know, the bottom line. And I would encourage everyone to read that. They can get it on the search engine, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us Anymore. I think they can get it on my website, too, www.stevequayle.com.
If you were able to get some of the bone marrow out of a giant's bone from the antiquity days, would you see a different genetic makeup as you would see from humans of today?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can tell you this, there are people that go around and get it. Some people that knew I was writing this book got a hold of me from Ohio, and this will blow your mind. They found, I think they were 9.5-foot giants in some of the burial mounds, you know. The minute they let it be known, guess what? Certain members from the federal government showed up and took the bones. This is what somebody always asks me, where are all the bones? And the point being is that it seems like every time there's a major find like this, somebody comes and grabs them up. I believe the Human Genome Project on the surface has the stated meaning. I believe beyond that, there's a group that's definitely looking, you could call it, for the giant gene. You know, there's human growth factor H, HGF-8, that they can introduce into mice and will literally cause the mice to grow to tremendous proportions, makes them stronger, etc. You've got the scientists now telling basically you're not going to die, George, because they can clone you a new body. They can download your entire memories, your entire sensory input, you know, and load it into a new body. And if you want, by getting connected to the right people, you can, you know, share their thoughts. In essence, you can have a thought sharing every single experience, whether it's love, hate, anger, orgasm, whatever. And there's actually a British couple that's doing that right now under a British Telecom grant.
I've always thought that that's exactly what they would do with people in mankind. You'd clone them, take their memories right off a chip, download it, and plug it right back in. And whenever the body's ready to age, you'd do it all over again. All over again. Stay with us. Stephen Quayle is my guest. His book, Genesis Giants, Master Builders of Prehistoric and Ancient Civilizations. I wonder if they helped build the pyramids. Let's find that out in a moment on Coast to Coast. Welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie with guest Stephen Quayle. Stephen, I want to relay a few fast blast questions to you. One very interesting from Wayne in Brook Park, Ohio. Wants to know if the Vatican, with all its history, has any data of this nature, what you were talking about, that they might be hiding. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with such specifics that, you know, it is absolutely astonishing to me that the amount of information that they have on this. They are also supposedly the group behind going out when any of the real artifacts of extreme importance, like giant skeletons and all this stuff, they're the ones that send out their, I guess you'd say, the equivalent of their cleaners, and they go out and get this stuff, and if they can't get it, they've got an agreement with certain, if you will, government agencies with us that go out and do it for them, too. So there's a real desire to suppress it, and so to answer his question, absolutely.
Is the suppression based on Genesis 6, that maybe they don't want any cooperation from that?
Exactly. Plus, it also points to the fact that given the revelation, and not only Genesis, but in Jude, the New Testament talks about it, the point I think they're trying to keep from everyone is it's, if you will, the prophetic ramifications. For instance, Jesus says in Matthew 24, just as in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man, okay? If you understand that the days of Noah were really raunchy and we're going to repeat them, that's probably one of those things you don't want to let known, just like if the third secret of Fatima is talking about the next pope being the AC, the Antichrist, or whatever the third secret of Fatima is, it's obviously of a...
Well, I don't think it's that.
No, I'm just saying that whatever it is that they want to keep it quiet, okay?
Well, maybe, whatever it is. I mean, there have been reports that it's been already announced.
Well,
I'm
sure,
not sure
no one believes that, George. The fact that it was that there'd be an attempt on the Pope's life. I mean, there are some people out there that have done a marvelous job of tracking it, and again, the point being is that it was never accepted. And I remember when, again, going back to Malachi Martin, the point being is that he did not indicate that it was anything sedate or tame, but rather so perilous and tumultuous that he dare not speak it.
There seems to be a way of trying to cover up some of the things that have occurred in ancient archaeological times. What's the reasoning behind that? Why not simply say, sure, there were giants. We believe this is where they came from. They were genetically altered later on. So be it.
Well, the Rand Corporation gave a report a number of years ago, and basically stated that it was their estimation that mankind was not sophisticated, intelligent, or spiritually capable of dealing with it, okay? Now, are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Rand paper?
Well, is that also the one with the Brookings report on
yes.
If mankind? All right.
Yep.
All right.
Similar, Rand and Brookings both came out with the same one. I think the biggest issue is that it obviously puts everything into a more spiritual context than it just simply a evolutionary, chemically determined context. And I think basically it would upset the status quo, and I think that's why this stuff is all suppressed. But I don't think it's going to stay suppressed. Did you see, for instance, the flying saucer picture that was on the web where the F-16 was encountering it over Maryland? They can't keep a handle on this thing forever, George, and it seems it's interesting to me that, again, call it coincidence, we get the Mel Gibson movie Signs, we get all this different stuff happening, and then bingo, British Columbia has a unique crop circle. They start happening all over the world. You asked me about the pyramids. There are pyramids all over the world. I don't believe the Great Pyramids were built by the pharaohs who claimed them. I believe they were built, thousands and thousands of years prior to the official date. I would say that Graham Hancock has done, and Bouval and John Anthony West have done fabulous jobs. But these guys, they just get clobbered by, quote-unquote, the professional archaeological community.
Well, is it possible that there were giants that lived during that period and that might explain how some of these huge boulders moved a little quicker?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you've got boulders, for instance, in Tiwanaku that weigh 200 tons, and when they're fitted together, and they're not just straight right angles being fitted together, some of these things are fitted together in some most unusual shapes, and then you get some of the stelae, if you will, or the glyphs, the Mayan glyphs, and it shows guys with kind of like a flamethrower on their back, or a laser. It's kind of an interesting thing. You've got Tibetan monks that can move extremely large and dense matter by their writings, and people have observed it. I haven't, but using a thing called harmonic levitation. obviously mass and density can be affected by, certain frequencies, and evidently the ancients, and I believe because of the supernatural intelligence that was imparted to them by these, quote, fallen angels, basically mastered a lot of this stuff. So I believe, quite candidly, that Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, all of the great structures of the world were built by the giants. I don't believe that, they were built by just the people who claim to have built them. And if you look at their original myths, Aztecs, Incas, Mayans, none of them claim to have built the cities that they inhabit.
Well, the one thing that I do not believe and never will believe is that they built them with ramps and they pulled these huge rocks up ramps to the top.
Right, and let me share this too. Classical archaeology states that everybody stayed kind of in their own backyard. It's called isolation,
Yes.
Versus diffusionism. Listen, can you imagine the oar strokes of somebody that was 28 feet tall? I mean, just think about it. Can you imagine the strength of someone that could lift, let's say, 4 or 5 tons? Do you think maybe they could pedal pretty fast, or they could paddle pretty fast? And again, even if you just assumed normal technology, it would be amazing. Then you get into the Vimana, V-I-M-A-N-A, the flying ships of the Mahabharata, the Indian flying ships, and you even get Hannibal, when was basically there are records of Hannibal encountering flying platforms that battled him, sending him back. So, the point is that are all these guys just stoned out of their mind and drunk? I don't think so. The point is it's amazing to me that people don't understand. Look, until the Rosetta Stone was found, that was basically a stone that enabled scholars to read hieroglyphics because it translated between Greek, the Dodetic script, and hieroglyphics. They had a tough time. And now, I believe the Rosetta Stone, I think that's what my book, Genesis 6 Giants, is. Quite candidly, there's no other book like it. There just simply is no other book like it. And I want to share with people that I guarantee them in the 479 pages, if their minds aren't blown and they go, wow, then I failed. But if I have, and I'm able to get them to think and to question, why are these things kept from us, I think it will help people to put history into perspective, and by putting history into perspective, they'll be able to see the future.
You will get some skeptics who say, nah, you're nuts, not true.
Yep, I know that, and I deal with them all the time, but I say this, look, I've done my homework, and if you want to argue over the history of these things, let's talk about that. But what skeptics typically do, out of either fear, anger, or jealousy, they go into what in Latin is called the argumentum ad hominem, which basically just means attack the writer, attack the man, but you can't really attack the argument because there's too much data. And we see that continuing all the time, and unfortunately, many incredibly gifted and talented men have been destroyed when they come up with anything that is not status quo. And my motto simply is this: the status quo of history is an absolute matrix, and 90% of prehistoric history and ancient history is a lie.
What's your take on Zecharia Sitchin, the author of the 12th Planet and some other related books?
Well, first of all, I've read everything he's written, okay? Mm-hmm. I would say this, where Zecharia Sitchin is claiming that the Anunnaki made us, okay, and that Adam was the first test tube child. Right. There are guys who are tremendous scholars of the Semitic language. I am not one of them, okay? But there are the guys, and they question a lot of his interpretation. Michael S. Heiser, he's a Ph.D. candidate, Department of Hebrew and Semitic Studies, University of Wisconsin, has basically said, Zecharia, a lot of your investigation is true, but a lot of your word derivations are wrong. And I would say this, it's amazing to me. People they want to throw God out, but they're certainly willing to accept the fact that maybe aliens genetically altered us or created us in the laboratory. Then my question to them is, who created the aliens? So if you get to first cause, when I'm saying this first cause, the, quote, absolute creative brilliance and genius of the universe, I say, Zecharia Sitchin's got some great stuff, but I also think that, and I can't agree with him on the Anunnaki. Listen, according to the Sumerian pantheon, the Anunnaki were the 7 judges of hell. They were the children of the god Anu, A-N-U, and they were contemporary with the 7 fates, or the Pleiades, And it's interesting because you see how if it's the 7 judges of hell, and Zechariah Sitchin says those who came from heaven to earth, and Leal was one of the gods of Sumerian. He was the child of An, A in heaven, and the son of earth. Okay, excuse me, the mother earth, Ki. So you see again this heaven and earth coming together to produce the gods. And listen, if you were a giant with supernatural intelligence, supernatural strength, supernatural wisdom, I think the people who you were ruling over, unless you had to get hungry and ate them all, would pretty much worship you. And I think that's the history of a lot of the demigods, especially of Greek and Roman mythology.
What I find fascinating, though, with you and with Sitchin and others is you all agree about giants, that they were there. It's just the interpretation of what they did and how they did it.
Right.
That's different.
And for the record, George, I don't think where Zechariah has done his excellent work in his areas, to my knowledge, the area of giants has never been as methodically attacked. And obviously I'm not being super linear and sequential tonight, but I can tell you this, the book is the size of a bloody phone book about. And when I say that, there is so much in it that will absolutely fill in the question marks, I can remember being a student in anthropology in college and absolutely saying, you mean you guys built this whole Australopithecus off of a jaw? You mean you built Cro-Magnon man out of this? In essence, there's a lot more, if you will, faith and speculation than when you find a complete skeleton. Again, I would encourage people who are on the internet to go to the website, stevequayle.com. They can link to it through artbell.com and look at the chart. It's absolutely amazing. Then look at the skulls. And when you look at the skulls and you look at the chart, you go, wow, this stuff is in museums, and no one's ever said, how did these guys get such big heads?
Well, Stephen, you and I have talked before, and there are many things you've pointed out that I go, wow, he's right on. I'm going to jump out of the box for a moment here and agree with you wholeheartedly about the origin of the giants, that they were there. I'm not sure I can believe that there's a secret group out there trying to genetically create them again. I hope that's not my own naivete here.
Well, again, I don't think it's naivete, but can I tell you something?
Absolutely.
We have a hard time.
And I won't be offended either.
No. I mean, our naivety is based on the fact that most of us really, and I would say this because of the blessing of living in America, we want to believe the best, The problem comes when you believe the best and you see that there are people that absolutely do not wish the best for you, but wish ultimate harm. We've talked about it on previous shows we've done about jihad and the fact of unleashing Ebola and some of these horrible, horrible biological pathogens. Who would do that, George? You wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But
somebody will. There are people that will do it.
There are people that will do it. So understand this, that when you're talking about genetics, you're not only talking about from 1999 on, you're talking about, the boys from Brazil. You're talking about Mengele type stuff, and you're then talking about, all of the science that was up to it, and then you're talking about what I would call the arcane science. And again, there's so much stuff that is not given to us because, again, of national security. By the way, I wish they would be honest and call it national insecurity, okay? I believe the American people are a lot brighter, and the people could handle the truth. And my statement is if they won't give us the truth, that means they want to control us with the lack of truth or with a lie.
Do you know what would happen if they built giants that ran amok? What a disaster this could be.
Well, let me ask you this. What do you think the psychology will be that if there is real or imagined, if you will, the battle in outer space comes to the battle on Earth? If let's say in the next 2 weeks, let's say instead of one incident, let's say we hear of 6 to 8 incidents, George, where there are actually flying saucers opening up with some kind of particle beam blasting people.
Funny you bring that up. I just had a story in India of some people who have been blasted by a huge sphere-type object, and they've been burned.
You got it. So that's one instant. What happens if it turns to 6, 8, or 12?
Then we got a problem.
Then we got a problem. Okay.
Then we have panic.
Yeah. Now remember when Whitley Strieber wrote Communion? Okay.
Sure.
The neat thing about that is in Whitley's own words, the fascinating thing about the aliens and the giants, and I mean this, they're both sex fiends. Okay. There are instances. I got to tell you a specific incident in Guayaquil, Ecuador, that was chronicled by Pedro Cieza, and I may be pronouncing his name wrong, de Leon. But he said this. The Ecuadorian giants were destroyed by thunderbolts in 1543. The teeth found with the giant skulls and bones, they were 3 fingers broad and 4 fingers long. He said they were 18 feet tall. He said in those days you could actually see on the rocks where the thunderbolts had hit them, okay? The reason why they also record the thunderbolts is that these guys, being 18 feet tall, were sexually going after the women, and I don't mean to be crude, but the bottom line is it killed the women, okay? And the point that I'm trying to make is that when you've got such specific chronicles, and usually, you know, the guys doing the chronicling aren't out there trying to just fit the history to fit their chief belief. You've got incidents where some of these guys' molars make a fist, George. Some of their molars was bigger than your fist. That's a big mouth.
That's a pretty big tooth to pull if you're a dentist, isn't it?
Yeah, and some of these guys had 40-inch feet. How big would someone with a 40-inch foot, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I got news for you. There's no way to even begin to fathom the stride of someone like that until you realize that they can outrun horses.
Stephen, a quick question out of Kennewick, Washington, and this guy is dead serious. He says, my daughter has 6 toes on each foot. What does this mean? Is this some kind of a genetic sign, or, you know, just a fluke?
My statement is, if she doesn't have 6 fingers, 6 toes, and double sets of teeth, he doesn't have to worry. But it is interesting. A little baby that belongs to one of my ex-secretaries had 6 fingers on one toe. 6 fingers on one hand, but not 6 fingers on the toes. Unless they have toes, if they had toes and fingers, I'd tell him point blank that she's got something interesting going on with her.
That is bizarre. If you can imagine it, a little girl with that.
Right, and again, you know, I know this sounds almost, and I don't mean it to sound cynical, but when you talk about guys that had double sets of teeth, I mean, you're talking about in the Old Testament, it talks about the lion men of Moab. And you know, interesting, by the way, he's calling from Kennewick. Did he send you that from Kennewick, Washington?
Yes.
You know, there's a fight going on over the Kennewick man, which is interesting because in the United States there's a law that anything that is found of antiquity is automatically assumed to be Native American. But when they ran the tests, the genetic DNA tests on Kennewick man, they found out he was pretty much European in about 3,000 years, I think 3,000 to 3,500 BC, okay?
Stay with us. Stephen Quayle, my guest. His book, Genesis 6 Giants. I'm George Norrie, and this is Coast to Coast AM. And this is Coast to Coast AM around the world, definitely around the country, as you listen to your favorite radio station. Stephen Quayle, my guest. I'm George Norrie. Stephen, are you afraid at all of the giants in the research you've done, or are you concerned about the future, a few years down the line here?
Oh, absolutely. I'm concerned about the future because, again, I believe that with what's going on, and obviously I believe at some point we're going to undergo, whether it's a staged or an implemented or a coerced, battle, if you will, with the guys from outer space. I think that we've got to have the knowledge. See, George, I believe with what I've done in Genesis 6, I've presented kind of, I guess, the key to unlocking history. And with the sister book that's Aliens and Fallen Angels, the Sexual Corruption of the Human Race, it's taking away the fear factor. It's not adding to it. But I can tell you that what concerns me is, again, that people who seem to be preoccupied with the mundane things of life, when I say the mundane things, just a day-to-day grind, when a lot of this stuff starts to happening, we're going to see a lot of people losing it. In other words, you know, it's going to flip them out. And I think if they have the knowledge base and they see how all this relates in history, I think it makes, you know, what could be considered scary and unnerving subject matter, I think it can make it a lot more palatable. Let's face it, most people in 20th century America or 21st century America now don't have to deal they think with the Middle Ages and demons and all the stuff that goes along with that. But I'm suggesting that all that stuff's going to come to the forefront. And let me share this, too, because I always get yelled at for not giving out my telephone number, because a lot of people are on the internet, but there are people that are listening that aren't on computer.
Well, that's true.
And so you guys don't get all the calls. My number, everyone, is 1-800-424-7870. 1-800-424-7870 for those who would like to order the book. And again, George, I think that by having such and this thing is a reference book, because, I mean, the whole half of it is an encyclopedia of this stuff. I think it's put together in such a way that there's no scare factor, but it's absolutely fascinating. And like I say, it gives you a groundwork to understand not only prehistoric history and ancient history. And by the way, my definition of prehistoric is prior to Adam and Eve. And the point being is it explains a lot of the monuments and who built them. Again, if you've got 10 guys that are 26 feet tall and they can each carry 5 tons, it makes 50-ton, blocks of stone pretty manageable, as, trying to come up with a certain amount of slaves with a certain incline to the ramp and certain ropes. It's just nonsense the way that modern history and ancient history has been presented in modern times.
First-time caller, you are on the air with Stephen Quayle on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Yeah. My name is Reed.
Well, hello, Reed.
How you doing tonight?
We are doing well. Thanks.
Listen, I just want to tell you, George, you're just a real worthy substitute for Art while he's out. I listen to you every night. I don't get much sleep. It's
yeah, me either.
Intriguing, fascinating topic tonight. Steve, I got to hand it to you. You probably put in so much research in this and that. I have a couple stories, too, about these giants. First of all, about 6 months ago, a man called Art and invited him to take a trip to his property in Utah, where he's way out like in southern Utah, St. George area, and he had a cave that he discovered on his property and had 3 of these giant mummies in there. They were like 12 feet long. Art was going to take him up on it. I don't know if he ever went out there or not, but it's awfully funny. You don't hear about it anymore. It got shut up real fast. I think probably the Smithsonian got a hold of it and got the bones and took them away. I haven't heard any more about it, but Art might know something about it. But I'm sure this ties in with what you're talking about. Also, in the latter part of the 1940s, after World War II, there was a miner that was going down the Colorado River, and he discovered this cave. And in this cave, he went in there, and there was this huge monoliths. I mean, they estimated the largest one was 180 tons, standing erect, with hieroglyphic type writings on it. Oh, and there was monoliths all over this cave, and there was over 5,000 these giant mummies in there. They were huge, people.
5,000 of them?
5,000 of them. And they shut it up real fast. The FBI went in there and they extracted the mummies. From what I heard, they went into the Smithsonian and were buried, of course, from the public. They don't want to let this kind of information out and frighten everybody, but they tried to seal up the cave with dynamite, but they blew the hole bigger, and I guess they just had a hell of a time sealing the cave up. But this is a fact, and they've got these artifacts in Smithsonian to this day. Also, I've also heard that they've also got the Noah's Ark is a real thing, okay, and they retrieved our archaeologists retrieved through the government the alabaster sarcophagus of Noah, and they also have whatever his remains are in there.
Well, Stephen, have you ever heard anything about that?
Well, yeah, especially from the time the supposed first of all, I believe obviously Noah's Ark is real. I believe that they have located it. I have heard rumors about the alabaster sarcophagus. The interesting thing is that there are people that claim it's on the top of Mount Ararat who have actually gone up to it. One of the former astronauts, I think, Irvin went up there. And, so that doesn't surprise me. I want to thank you, Reed, for sharing that story about southern Utah and the Grand Canyon, because, again, if people want to read the most fascinating thing in 1905, Kincaid found also a labyrinth with mummies, giant mummies, and hieroglyphics, and everything in the area of the Grand Canyon has an Egyptian name. And you ask yourself, okay, how does that happen? That something in, Colorado River in Utah or wherever. Forgive me, not Utah, but Colorado, where that Arizona, where that can happen. How is it that they all have Egyptian names? And the obvious answer to that is that it had to have been passed down for a long time.
Why withhold information, though, Steve? Why hold it back?
Well, first of all, I think, I've tried to answer that. I think that one thing that people need to realize, and I think that Reed brought up an interesting point, as I track a lot, when I say track, is I investigate and run down a lot of the different cave structures and labyrinths, etc., you'll find a lot of them are turned into military bases and they're off limits, okay, to archaeologists. A good example is China Lake. China Lake has the naval weapon laboratory there, all the stuff that goes on in China Lake. But it's true in so many different parts of the country, What people don't understand is that when the giants were fleeing, from the wrath of God in the Middle East, literally, they built phenomenal underground tunnels, underground, if you will, cities. If you can go to Turkey and Cappadocia and see the most incredible underground tunnel structure in the world. Have you ever seen it?
Yes.
Okay, and then you can go to a place called Nemrut Dag, D-A-G-H, and you can see 7 giant thrones that are on the plains of Nemrut, which basically people say, that was one of the kings of, the time that built it. There were 7 kings of the plains of that specific area, and George, you'd have to be about 24 to 28 feet tall to sit in those things. So, there's all these interesting artifacts all over the world. And then he also made reference to the gentleman in Utah. By the way, if the gentleman in Utah is listening, please call me at that 1-800-424-7870. And, George, if anybody else out there in Ohio, Pennsylvania has any of the original stories out of the newspapers. By the way, during the turn of the century into the early 20s and 30s, the American newspapers were riddled with stories of giants 12 feet tall, copper armor, all sorts of weapons of warfare. Barry Fell, who I believe now has passed away, wrote 3 great books for the listeners out there, America, BC, Bronze Age America, and Saga America. And he was a Harvard ethnologist and president of the American Epigraphic Society. He's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, even to the people that just absolutely turn livid when you mention his name, that America was settled thousands of years ago by a lot different people than, quote, Leif Erikson and the Vikings.
Wildcard caller, you are on the air. Welcome to the show. Hello? Wildcard caller? Well, we have no time for you. We will clip you off and go west of the Rockies in California. You are on Coast to Coast.
Yeah, hi, gentlemen.
Hi there.
I don't know if you heard Stephen Hawking said that he predicted a new species of human on the planet within the next 1,000 years, which I thought was an interesting prediction out of the blue to me. And also I have in front of me some pictures of gold engravings from the Kimball Cave pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Kimball was on Art Show. We got him off the website.
Yes.
You've seen these, I suppose, huh?
I have not. Stephen, you have.
Yep.
Oh, aren't they? That's just amazing, that they are... Egyptian folks. I see it no big deal, getting across the ocean in the Atlantic. You can drift across, with the sail you can get even faster. Makes me wonder what sort of ships giants would have, You were talking about oar strokes, and I was thinking it would be quite the thing to see a gigantic ship built by giants. But it reminds me of Planet of the Apes, too. I was just watching that a few different times, and it's on HBO now, so... looking at it carefully, and it dawned on me after the last time I saw it that this could actually happen, that one species could take over another. And
it happens all the time, doesn't it, Stephen?
Well, when you're talking like Planet of the Apes, let me share this. If you've got a bunch of people then let me just say this again, not by our standards, but are set on world domination. It's kind of like the movie Universal Soldier, okay? You can create a bunch of hybrids, and in creating those hybrids, you take away all conscience, you take away, any propensity to show any mercy, and you can make the ultimate killing machine. Imagine something that has the same desires as, basically turning a bunch of giants into great white sharks on the land, and I don't mean literally fish, I mean with the appetite that you could have, and I think it becomes a fascinating topic for the future.
Were there any female giants, Stephen?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, again, when the angels, and understand this, a lot of people say, well, Jesus said in heaven they're neither given or taken in marriage. Well, that's in heaven. God's fury came down on the ones that committed sex sin. It says that they're reserved in Tartarus. And interestingly enough, in Greek mythology, Tartarus is an area below Hades where the primeval deities, the Titans, were basically chained up. And the Titans, you remember the story Clash of the Titans,
Clash, yep.
Well, the interesting thing about the Titans is you have a specific group of fallen angels that committed sex sin. Those ones are locked up until the end times, and then guess what? They get loosed again, according to, biblical prophecy. Then you've got a bunch of fallen angels out there that didn't commit sex sin that are still, if you will, vying for planet Earth. And a lot of people say, well, I don't believe in angels. Well, the point is that you can certainly believe in what you can see, and George, we're talking about some of the bones that just the femur of some of these people are 72 inches to 84 inches long.
That's almost hard to believe, but you're right.
It is hard to believe. And you're talking about people that can rip out trees just by hugging it, And so, for instance, in Texas, this is a fascinating story. In Texas, they had 9 to 12 foot tall, what are called the Karankawas, kind of like Chiricahuas, only Karankawas. And the tribal name, and they were all cannibals. And when you get into the Anasazi of the desert Southwest, Discovery Magazine carried a fabulous story on what happened to the Anasazi. And what happened to them was the same thing pretty much that happened to Easter Island. Their mysterious disappearance is everybody ate each other out of existence. National Geographic carried the story that, by the way, the Eastern Islanders or the Rapa Nui were cannibals, and they used to have a curse. Here's their curse. Your grandmother's flesh lies rotting between my teeth.
Oh, what a great thought
that's
that is.
Yeah, that's a lovely thing. I bet you get invited over for dinner. Hi, you're next, The point is that, again, the infinite amount of, or maybe massive is a better word, the massive amount of information, the massive amount of skeletal remains, the massive amount of not only oral tradition, but written diaries, digests, people running into this stuff in contemporary history, and yet people say, well, I don't believe it. Well, to that I just say, live in denial.
East of the Rockies in Kansas, you are on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning to you.
Okay, I have a comment and I have a question. My comment is, I believe that Father Malachi Martin was silenced, and wrongfully so. And I was want to ask your guest if he believes in Bigfoot, and if he does he believe that this creature is connected to what he's talking about?
All right, good question.
That is a great question. Yes, I believe in Bigfoot. When you go to understanding Bigfoot and the Sasquatch and all the different names, whether it's the Chinese version or every place in the world seems to have it, yes, I believe that there are, how should I say this, transgenic species. In other words, people have been messing with this stuff, or even say the entities. An interesting thing, with every abduction that I know of, pretty much, that, and I used to catalog, George, all of them, there's this sexual thing. Everybody's always playing around with either the egg of the woman, the sperm of the man, and these people feel violated and raped.
Right.
All I can tell you is with the almost exponential speed of genetic engineering and cloning and everything I've talked about with the whole soul catcher, I believe that Bigfoot and all those things are real, and even the latest hair sample of the last Sasquatch could not be DNA typed to anything that's currently known.
Wow. Currently, no, they couldn't put it together.
They couldn't put it together. In other words, it didn't match the great apes. It wasn't human. It was something other than that.
First-time caller, welcome to Coast. Hi there.
Hi there.
Yes, sir. You are on the air.
Oh, this is a wild night. You guys are creeping me out. I'm watching the Perseid meteor shower from the coast of Mississippi.
Oh, you got to tell me. What do they look like? Is it grand?
Oh, no, the Leonoids last year was grand. This is cool.
Okay.
They're nice. And I've noticed that throughout recorded history and what we've been able to tell of prehistory and legends that come down, events like the Leonoids of last year are noted and passed down from generation, the stories. you were talking about fallen angels and the Himalayas, meaning fallen. Relationships to that, is there any chronological correlation to the legends of giants in conjunction to meteor showers?
All right, any tie in there, Stephen?
Yeah, that's a great question because, yes, very specifically, the bottom line is that falling stars, if you will, and that's what they were called prior to being officially known as asteroids and comets. The point is that the ancients always believed that when they saw meteor storms and they saw the other thing, that, if you will, heavenly beings, those from heaven, were actually coming to earth. Now, it's interesting that the word angel actually means messenger, and it also, and like I said, star, okay? The Hebrews taught and antiquity taught that each one of the stars was a specific abode of an angel. So there was always, in essence, when comets were a foreboding of evil. And it's interesting because that's why all, and I say ALL, of the ancient civilizations were so concerned with what was taken to heaven. They looked at the stuff as omens, and they looked at the different placement of the planets. And what's interesting, George, is like the Dogon tribe, D-O-G-O-N, in Timbuktu. And, I used to think, man, is there really a place called Timbuktu? It's in Africa. They actually knew about the dog star in Sirius that you cannot see with the naked eye.
You're absolutely right. And there's much more to come. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Stephen, I do have to compliment you on the effort and the work that you've put into this book, which is as big as a giant, quite frankly, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I almost think, to tell people how much 480 pages is, you got to put it in pounds, It truly, there is nothing like it, and I will make a promise. I can tell you this, for the people that really want to put the question marks they've had in their minds all these years, I think it will give them exclamation points. I don't mean that to sound corny, but what it does, it answers a lot of questions, and it tells us where it's going. And I think that's what, the focus of tonight's interview, from your perspective, George, are we going to see this stuff again? And yes, we are. And the ramifications are so great, that I think that, except the days be short and there'd be no flesh left alive. That's what Jesus said, and I think it's going to get bad.
Did it take you much time to dig up some of these pictures, these real-life pictures of these fossilized giants? And, I mean, that, I think, makes the whole book because it just illustrates exactly what you're talking about. When you can see it in visual form, it's just strange.
Well, I actually scour, and when I say that, I mean that. I'm scouring the earth for those pictures right now. The pictures that are in that book, half of them came from Europe, and that's why I put out a request because, this broadcast goes worldwide. And like I said, the last time I was on our show, I got a call an email from some guys in Eastern Europe that are fronting an expedition, and they claim to have a cave of these guys that are 12 feet tall. And, I want pictures, and the interview, and I didn't hear the show when the gentleman from Utah called, but the excitement of that. My guess is, as Reed said earlier, that the boys got him. For instance, again, understand, by law, anything that's found in the United States that is of a certain age, and it's pre-1850 or something, is automatically considered a Native American artifact, even though there were no 12-foot-tall Apaches. So, under the guise of it's illegal to own that, they come and take that stuff away. The last person you want to tell when you find that stuff is the authorities. Please give me a call so we can at least get it photographed and stuff before they come and take it away.
Let's go wildcard caller in Florida. Welcome to Coast. Good morning.
Hey, George, you're slowly taking over Art's body, I think.
Nah, not at all. When he resurrects, he'll be here in grand style.
I heard that. This is Gary calling from Tampa, listening on 970 WFLA. Steve, my father's passed away now, but for some years when I was a little guy, he used to tell me stories about something about when the tall men walked and that there was these carvings of these tall people on stones all around the world. But that that's another story. What I wanted to ask you about was some time ago, I had heard that there was a whole bunch of caves found somewhere in South America that were really unexplained, that they were perfectly round. Do you know anything about that? Or
are you talking about the caves of the Cloud people?
It could very well be. I'm not sure.
Right. Interesting you would say that, because the find that's on my website on the from the Ancient American, and what a fabulous magazine. If people are interested in this, I got to tell you, that's the only magazine I know existing in the world that deals with this. But you're bringing up a fascinating point. The cave entrance to this thing that was found in the desert Southwest is perfectly round. And you can actually go to my website and click on it, and you'll see under photos, you'll actually see the cave, you'll see the actual skeletons. This thing has just been found in the last couple months.
Well, if it's actually round, it obviously was made by someone.
Well, not only that, but the point is that, there are specific entrances, and again, the question is, how do you carve perfectly round holes sometimes in solid granite with, basically as conventional archaeology would lead you to believe, with stone mallets and, flint chopping pieces? It can't be done.
A big drill.
Yeah.
Or how about a major heat source?
You got it.
Yep.
And that's again the thing that's fascinating, because and the caller's bringing out a point that people have got to understand. We're not talking about isolated instances. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of monuments dealing with giants, thousands of articles, stories, digests, diaries. We're talking about bones upon bones that even still exist in some of the world's museums. We're talking about skulls so big that even the ones that have been found in America, fascinating enough, I mean, they claim that some of the cranial masses, as I said earlier, 4 to 6 times that of a typical human. Can you imagine the size of the brain? Can you imagine? And by the way, these guys weren't, lacking in intelligence, nor were they lacking in strength. So again, follow me. Knowledge is exploding, George. And so by the time they get the combination of genetics, nanotechnology, and the soul catcher chip, which really exists, we've got now the days of what are called xenotransplants, where you take animal organs grown in animals, put them into people. And, we've got all of the interesting legends. Even Atlantis was destroyed because of their genetic engineering. I mean, that's what history records as one of the reasons. So, that which has been will be again. And it's almost like Back to the Future. And I think it's important that people understand that there is no place to find a greater body of this kind of information than that's in my book, because, again, I spent 30 years. This is I think I'll go out and do it, This is 30 years of stuff.
Listen to this bizarre one, Steve. What happens if they're able to download your memory onto a chip, and then they put the chip into, let's say, a mouse or a cow? Wouldn't you would think that was you, right?
Well, I can tell you this. There comes a point where you get into the human spirit, and the spirit, the breath of God versus just the soul of man. Okay, because again, it's fascinating to me that whenever you talk to people who have left the world of black ops, who are around the alien situation, you always hear the word incubatorium. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Very
similar to the X-Files movie. And I mean, I've talked to people that were so scared. I'm talking tough guys, George. I'm not talking, weak men, that they're absolutely traumatized. Again, you had Stan Deo on the other night. What Stan has done is a marvelous job of explaining to people how the propulsion systems on this stuff work, okay?
Right.
And so, again, if you take the kind of information that's out there, I want to absolutely provide people a basis, and I know I can speak for Stan on this too, so they understand, so they don't have to fear.
West of the Rockies in California, welcome to Coast with guest Stephen Quayle. Hi there.
Hello, how are you guys doing?
We're doing well, thank you.
I had 2 different subjects here, and I'll make them quick if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the first one was, in the beginning, your guest, Steve, is that your name?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a brother named Steve, so no problem there. But anyways, you had said that angels and stars meant the same thing in the Bible. and I have an interlinear, and, sometimes words are used in different ways, like
right,
angel.
and I said specifically they're interchanged in angel, the 7 stars, which are the 7 churches.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I defined it. I'm sorry, maybe you didn't hear it.
Yeah, but I don't think you can really make that angels, though, can you?
Well,
because they're churches.
Yeah, but it says the 7 angels, which are the 7...
allegorical.
Well, you could call it allegorical. I'm just saying that the bottom line is that in the Book of Revelation specifically, whether it's an allegory or even a picture, a word picture. I'm just saying that the 7 stars, which are the 7 angels of the 7 churches.
I got you. I didn't hear that, so I was just curious. But I did a word study on it. It's like they're not used interchangeably.
No, and please, I didn't mean to make that.
No problem. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up is that in the Bible, where the term "sons of God" comes up, actually we have an explanation of what that all was in Deuteronomy 7:3-4. The law concerning that problem that had existed then was brought up, and that was talking about intermarriage between the sons of God or those who follow God.
Yeah, that's not true. The sons of God are the Beni Elohim, and the bottom line is the Schofield and others. That came into the Christian, if you will, thought process about 400 A.D., and I can tell you this, if you go and look it up in your concordance, the sons of God is especially in the book of Job. First couple chapters is talking about there was a time when the sons of God came before the presence of the Lord, and Satan came also with them. It is never used of man. Jesus was called the Son of Man. The sons of God in the Old Testament are always, if you look at, and please look it up to satisfy yourself, but it's the B'nai Elohim.
In the old Greek movies, the Hercules movies and things like that, Stephen, we always saw the gods looking down on mankind, but they were always huge. They were always, the Titans. And, of course, that was movie and that was interpretation, but you know what? They might have stumbled onto something.
Well, for instance, you asked me if there were female giants. Aphrodite, okay? Let's go to Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and Venus, okay? Aphrodite was a titaness, and it was said that her sexual appetite could never be satisfied, okay? And so when you see that in the Greek and you see in the Roman, different names for different entities. I mean, these were big people, and like you say, in all of the movies, especially the fictional movies, they always show, in essence, the giants being bigger than everybody else. Hercules was obviously, according to mythology, he was basically his father was the god and his mother was an earth woman, and you get into all of the great heroes of history being as big as they are, as powerful as they are. Obviously, they'd be worshipped as gods.
East of the Rockies in Ohio, you're on the air. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, this is Jerry from Ohio.
Hello, Jerry.
And I'm glad to talk to you, George, and to Steve. And I just wanted to bring up 2 things. I read the book Enoch, okay?
Right.
And in there, all the angels had a name. And they named the angels that came to earth to teach the earth people how to make iron, sorcery, astrology, all these angels, and they all mated with the women on earth.
Correct.
And they said there was giants, and the giants destroyed themselves by eating everybody. I mean, they couldn't get enough food.
Right, exactly. They ate themselves out of existence, and the very progeny of the giants, for instance, again, we're talking, George's question is what happened to all these guys? They were either killed or they ate each other out of existence. They basically could not, satisfy their hunger, and basically down to the last man, or I guess you'd say the last man chomping. That's just the history that is presented when you go and look at all this stuff.
Right. And up in Ohio here, I heard about the bodies they had found, the skeletons and that,
Right.
But the mound builders, they built these big serpents and that.
Right.
But the only way you can tell they're a serpent is you have to get up on a tower to look at them.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking, well, they don't know where the mound builders went, what happened to them. But I said, why couldn't it have been these giants that built these serpents? Because if they were so tall, they could look and see what they were building almost.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and one that most people, again, I want everyone to go to the chart on my website because it's impossible for me to show you how big, 24 and 36 feet tall is. But if you're 36 feet up in the air, you're up high enough in a cherry picker, you get a bird's eye view of the size of all the stuff that you're either drawing or lasing into the soil or into the rock.
That's hard to imagine, somebody that big.
I'm tracking it down right now, but in my book, I have a picture by Dora. It's a drawing, but Richard Coombs, who has researched it, said he's got reports of giants that are 60 feet tall. Now, that's one that would be amazing. But sure that's what a lot of the middle-aged guys talked about in their writings, and quite candidly, that's huge.
First-time caller in Kentucky. You're on the air on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering about like the Romans he was talking about that were giants, thousands of them fighting.
Right.
And weren't like Romans a lot shorter than we are now, and wouldn't a giant be a lot, could be a lot smaller, and like word of mouth,
made them look bigger.
Stories.
Right. Interestingly enough, the Caesars wrote such detail about the giants. For instance, the Scythians, which the Romans learned to fight them close and to basically take them at the kneecap. And the actual battles and the actual encounters where literally 100,000 were slain in a day were chronicled with such degree that basically at first the Romans were, just absolutely scared to death of them. But the problem with these guys is they were pretty big and, they were vulnerable. And I assume that, the Romans were known for their incredible fighting skills. And I would just encourage you that if this kind of stuff interests you, I have about 20 pages on the Roman battles with the giants, and it will blow your mind.
Wild card caller in Wisconsin, your turn. You're on Coast to Coast.
Yes, Mike from La Crosse. You've referenced
Michael.
God, the Bible, and Jesus on several occasions. Can you comment on Satan and then cut to the quick? Do we have a God and do we have a Jesus, and is the Bible real?
Well, first of all, absolutely, I believe it is, and I believe that, the point is that there is truth. I believe that there is an absolute. People say there are no such things as absolute. They've made the statement that there are none, proving there are. I believe that the bottom line is Satan is real. The whole, if you will, supernatural realm, the purpose in producing giants, and we can't get to it in this show, but I go into great detail, sir, on what the whole point of this was. When it says Noah was perfect in his generations, he was one of the only guys that hadn't had genetic tampering with all of the blood of the Nephilim running through his veins. So, to answer your question, I believe absolutely, and I believe that we're in that time period now where things are going to get very, very unusual.
Some of the people on this planet have either pituitary problems, thyroid problems, which I think creates them being giants today.
Right.
The giants of the past were normal, were they not?
They were not. They were super normal from the standpoint. Again, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's revisit it. The point is that gigantism or acromegaly, it usually results in early death, incredible weakness, and basically it's an anomaly of the pituitary, of the endocrine system, and like Andre the Giant. Remember him, the wrestler?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he died of that very medical disorder. And so the point is, we're not talking about people who are, let's say this, having a hard time getting around. Some of these giants had the dexterity of acrobats, and, the point being is that's what amazed everybody, not only being so big, so strong, and so massive, but their speed and agility is just unparalleled.
Stephen, the next time I walk around and if I see a giant, I'm going to blame you for it. You know that.
Yeah, that's fine. And again, I would just encourage people, this is fascinating to them, and I believe it is the Rosetta Stone of history. It fills in the missing blanks, and I think it'll put a lot of things into perspective for people. And again, my toll-free number for those that aren't on the Internet is 1-800-424-7870.
One more time.
1-800-424-7870.
And to those who want to just link up with Stephen Quayle's website, all you have to do is go to Art Bell's, click right onto that, and then Keith Rowland has it all set up where you can just click on to Stephen Quayle's as well. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, George.
Here's Stephen Quayle. He's been a guest on Art's program. He's been with me before as we talk about a number of things that he has written about. And this time, giants. For Will Hilliard, Rondi Bussinger, Lisa Lyon, Daylani Conrad, Howard Morton, the webmaster, of course, Keith Rowland, Alan Corbett, and the master, Art Bell. From somewhere out there, I'm George Norrie. Have a good day, everyone.